with Starbucks, they're not in the main, right? Because Australians love their local coffee.
Talk about a place where they blew it. They just had their heads handed to them.
How do some of these better companies collaborate with their customers?
Doing good voice of customer listening is a way of collaborating with your customers, particularly if you have inner loops and outer loops. So you're telling your customers what you're doing based on their feedback, and you're actually working inside your organization to get to root causes, to get to innovation.
I've been starting to do a lot of work around organizational identity and really trying to understand what strong organizations are able to do differently. Would you have any feedback?
I think you should be able to palpably feel the identity in the interactions.
Does AI then play a different role in a customer experience led organization versus a commodity based one? Joseph, welcome to the Ultra Growth Podcast. How are you going?
Oh, it's awesome to be with you. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Joseph, you've dedicated much of your career to understanding what makes great companies tick and truly stand out in the eyes of the customers. Can you talk about what sparked your interest and ultimately led to a passion for customer experience?
Well, I had these parents who kept telling me, the world was not made for you, Joseph. You are here to serve others, and it's through serving others that something good might happen for you. I think it got through my thick head, and at some point in time, I start realizing that the world is really needing people who create value for others. And so going through graduate school and focusing on organizational development and meeting with some great people along my journey, we just kept focusing on that same message over and over again. And how do we really make that happen in a culture? How do we make it happen through people, through process, through technology, so that people want to keep coming back to your business and tell their friends?
Why do you think your parents were so service driven?
I think there's a couple of different pieces to this. My parents they adopted me after many, many attempts to try to have kids. And my birth story wasn't such a pretty one either. And I think they came from hardship and, post-depression babies here in the United States. And so they were the ones who would save their tin foil, their aluminum foil, and put it in balls after they used it. So I think there was a scarcity mindset, and they believed that the only way you could prevail was to fight through that by generating value.
Hmm. Do you think that we've lost that?
Yeah, I think we have an entitlement mindset right now globally. I mean, if you read books like The Rise of Selfishness in America by James Lincoln Collier, it was written many years ago. But the point is, we became more and more obsessed about me, me, me. It's about me. It's not about others. And ironically, I think the more you focus on yourself, for most people, it doesn't work out. And the more you focus on others, for most people, it works out. Now, there's exceptions and there's guardrails, and you need to make sure you're not a doormat. There's a difference between servitude and service professionalism. And so I think those guidelines are important, but there are way too many people who want to become rich and famous and internet celebrities without creating much value.
Do you think the me culture has impacted the way that we service our customers?
Yeah, I think there's an otherness gene that some of us have, and or we had parents who kind of taught us that lesson. It's harder to find people with that gene, I think, today than it might have been. I worked for a company in Australia, and they really talked about the customer service gene and how rare it is to find. And in their space, they were in the technology sector, right, where people are more focused on the zeros and ones maybe than they are on the human panoply of emotions. But they really search for that because they can teach a lot around zeros and ones. It's really difficult to teach people how to become empathetic, though it is possible. It is a part of the emotional intelligence toolkit, and clearly it's trainable.
It's interesting that you brought up the Australian context. So obviously, I'm here in Australia. I grew up in the US, so I get back to California a bit to see my parents. And one of the interesting phenomena is, I mean, Australia is great in a lot of things, but I think our attitude in terms of customer service, particularly hand-to-hand customer service is really poor. It's almost like when you walk in a shop here, you feel like you're a burden. Now, a lot of people feel that's because we don't have tips. I disagree. I think it's just there's a hardness in the Aussie culture that's it's different. It's just different. And have how does cultural context affect customer experience? And have you like really taken time to understand that?
Well, first off, I spent a lot of time in Australia, so I would, completely agree. It's a little flintier there. I go to restaurants and, the QR code on the menu was the common phenomena, whereas more, it's starting to evolve more in the United States, and finding somebody to actually help you with that order was not as common. The reality is that people underneath all of the cultural differences want to be seen, heard, valued, appreciated. This has been true for time immemorial, and I think it will continue to be true in the age of AI. We will want to have someone say, "You matter. You matter to me, and I see you. I hear you. I am somehow factoring in your uniqueness and personalizing at some level to who you are." So I think that's true everywhere, and I faced this. I worked with Ritz-Carlton when they were opening in different parts of the world, for Russia, for example. And, we were told from the beginning, this is a "niet" culture. It's no is the default. And in truth, if you come in with a slightly different value proposition, even though people are accustomed to that, they find it refreshing. And so the Ritz-Carlton was embraced really quickly upon its entrance there.
That's really interesting, Joseph. Like, can you truly globalize a brand and expect standardization around the way that that brand enacts its customer service? Like, would that be a pipe dream?
It's a bit of a pipe dream. I mean, I think you have to have some core components that you consistently deliver everywhere, every time, no excuses. Or you have to customize and nuance. There's no doubt about that. I've watched Starbucks over the years because I've worked with them for a long time, and there were times where we would just impose the American way on places, and we would come to the realization that no, that's not the way people want service. It's too, when we start writing names on cups back in the day in the UK, people just panned it. Like, what the heck is the United States doing to us? They're putting our names on cups. How tawdry, how lowbrow. And over time, some of that had to be modified. Even how you provide your products to the market has to be modified. But what I find is that most people over dramatize all of that. Like, everything is different. I'm a block away, and the people in my block are completely different than the people a block over. Um, I think we have to factor it in, but we have to assume the commonalities and deliver against that, and then tailor the experience off of that.
The interesting thing, and you know this coming to Australia, like with Starbucks, they're they're not in the main, right? Because Australians love their local coffee and their local I'm very
I have
snobbish about.
scars. I have scars from the effort to get into Australia. Talk about a place where they blew it. I mean, they came in the glory of jeans, and all the locals were just amazing. And they just had their heads handed to them, and they capitulated, pulled out. And you just really see them in high street locations now, right? Like, they're not a common phenomena in Australia. And you have great coffee. You have so much variety of cultural experiences around coffee there. It's embarrassing what happened. But I do think, for an expat or somebody who's traveling from the United States, I'm still willing to look for my Starbucks in the midst of all of that. So there's a place for that.
Now, you studied companies like Starbucks, the Ritz-Carlton, Zappos, like what and these firms are obviously renowned for customer satisfaction. Like, what were the common threads that you encountered throughout all these brands that really helped set them apart?
So early on, I was a consultant in customer experience before we knew what it was. And so I started investing in helping companies do this. And I normally get into the front door as a consultant, and then the books come about as a result of having journeyed with them from an insider perspective. And some of these brands are willing to tell their story or have their stories told, and others are not. So part of the similarities are because I was involved, kind of trying to drive a certain agenda. So I always worry about How much of it is it me trying to see what I like to see? But what I do know is that great leaders are embrace that human connection matters. They embrace that customer loyalty is not a commodity. They work hard at differentiating by creating an enveloping experience that drives a certain kind of emotional outcome that is brand consistent. So I talk a lot about branded customer experiences and a desired emotional outcome to all interactions. And you'll see that in pretty much every brand that I've had the good fortune of working with and differentiating themselves from their competition. Whether that's a tiny shoe company here in the United States, it's not common in Australia, but called Zappos, where we just wanted to have fun and we wanted to play. And when you called the contact center, you were going to have wowful fun, right? It was going to be playful. Quite different than a Ritz-Carlton, where you can have fun, but it's under the staid veneer of lots of brand equity.
Yeah. Zappos was amazing. I mean, I remember my mom would send me shoes and like I'd have a year to return them for free, right? And being in Australia, like it was just wild. And I think a lot of Australian companies, like Style Trend, there were certain companies that tried to adopt that willingness. And I think the Iconic as well, like they just realized that most people with free returns, particularly in e-com, it's going to enable them to want to buy things because I guess one of the biggest concerns when you're buying things online is they're going to fit.
Well, and in the early days, everybody thought online was just discount, right? So Zappos was trying to stay premium, and so how are we going to stay premium unless we do these over the top sort of things, right? Like, and it was amazing. We had policies just to give you a feel for how far this can go. That if you call us and say, I've just passed my 1 year return date, but I've had a lot of trauma in my life this last year, but I plan to return them next week. We'd say, absolutely, man. Let me take care of that for you in terms of whatever credit that you were deserved because, you got reimposed a price. But we credit you right immediately. And you'd say, no, 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 I don't even trust myself necessarily. So, in the last year I haven't been able to pull it off. I'm kind of saying that I'm hoping you'll just give me a little grace. And we'd say, no, we've refunded that money that we took back out of your account. We can impose that again in a month, right? Like there was nothing on our books that was really being affected by it, but the goodwill perception of being willing to give you a credit when you didn't even deserve it yet. We trusted you more than you trusted yourself. Maybe this is a trustworthy brand. And I think a lot of this stuff is, what I extend to you, I get back. It's real reciprocity theory. There are exceptions. There are breakages. There are crooks. But if you treat every customer as if they're that, then you tend not to have many customers because I hate being told that, I am pernicious in some way that I know I'm not. And if I fail and they want to impose some sanction on me, then that's legit. But until then, treat me like I have money and I'm ready to spend it on you.
I mean, we most of us know that the Zappos story that are obviously interested in brands like that, and it appears the founders were mavericks. Like there was an unfortunate story with one of them, and obviously he died, and it was a really sad story. But like, what was it like to work with those guys? Like, were they really kind of like outliers and oddballs?
Tony Hsieh is who you're talking about. And I talked to him just months before he perished on his own, hoisted on his own petard, drug addiction, emperor has no clothes, and surrounded himself around yes people when he really needed people to set some limits on him. He was a great dreamer, an amazing entrepreneur, a kid who when he went to Harvard, he rented out space in the cafeteria so that he could, repurpose it for entrepreneurial purposes. He made pizzas there when it was, off times for the kitchen. And the beauty of the founders is that he ended up hiring as his chief operating officer a kid who also went to Stanford, who would buy these pizzas because Tony was selling them by the pizza. And this kid, Alfred Lin, would buy the pizza and then he'd go to the study areas and sell it by the slice. So, he said, this guy's making more per unit than I am selling it to him. So I want to hire him when the days of what Zappos came into play. So those are the kind of people you're talking about, really remarkable visionaries.
It's an interesting thing, right? Because I think you see and you read a lot about culture. You go into any organization, you see mission, vision statements on the wall. But I think cultures don't just happen by chance. Like, how do leaders actually systematically go beyond mission statements and embed customer centric values within the very DNA of their companies?
I'm going to bank off Zappos as an example. First off, they refused to want to do the mission statement and the value statement. They thought it was too corporate, and lots of entrepreneurial brands really don't want to be that. So it took them a long time, and they ultimately created their values differently. They, instead of going to a corporate retreat where, some leaders kind of divine the values, they literally just ask people, what does it take to be successful here? What's the difference between those who make it and those who don't, those who contribute and those who are not high performers? And they did a factor analysis on all the things they got from the front line, and they created their values. And that's why they have things like, create fun and a little weirdness, or, be humble, things you don't necessarily see in a value structure. But for companies that do it, like Ritz-Carlton has very formal values and a very formal architecture for their culture. The difference is they talk about it every day. They literally do it at daily lineup. They talk about it as a context for the wow stories that they share. We delivered wow because we lived our value. Here's the specific value. We created uncompromising levels of cleanliness. We created an environment of uncompromising levels of cleanliness. That's their 12th value, right? And so we show how that wowed somebody, and we link our values to behaviors, and those behaviors cut through, put to some kind of emotional outcome for the guest.
I remember reading about Zappos some time ago, and about the staff too, like, and how grateful a lot of these staff were to not be working in casinos and stuff. Like, I wonder how much of their staff engagement was built around this kind of captive market for staff too, right? Because these are all people that generally have to work in a casino weird hours of the night, and now they have like a stable job, and Zappos has like the pick of the litter. Like, I wonder if there's something to be said about that too.
Yeah, so Zappos started in the Silicon Valley, I think in the original building of Craigslist. It's, just to put it in perspective. At some point, they realized, given the nature of their work, they needed a 24/7 workforce. They were going to find that easily in Las Vegas, the city that never sleeps, like New York. And so they had that kind of mindset. I think they created a different kind of culture, a place people wanted to work. They were acquired by Amazon. They paid at the median, like at the 50th percentile. I think Amazon was paying at the 75th percentile, but they had far more enrichment around cultural elements and lots more play, lots more fun, lots more spontaneous activities in the workforce. But the same could be said about, the ladies and gentlemen of the Ritz-Carlton, where people are treated like ladies and gentlemen. And if I were to go into a Ritz-Carlton as a guest, a lady or gentleman guest of the Ritz-Carlton, and I mistreated an employee, a lady or gentleman of the Ritz-Carlton, then the general manager would approach me and say, Joseph, either you comport your behavior to that of a gentleman as it relates to our gentleman, or else you're going to need to go to the Four Seasons and we'll pay for your first night. And I think that's where you start to see it. It's the verbalization that our team member matters, but it's putting some money and effort behind it. In the case of Zappos, it's the enrichment of the culture. In the case of the Ritz-Carlton, it's really being willing to fire a guest if they mistreat your team member.
I've been starting to do a lot of work around organizational identity, and really trying to understand what strong organizations are able to do differently. Would you have any feedback on that?
Well, I can first tell you that you walk into buildings and you feel organizational identity. I can guarantee you that if you went to the headquarters of Starbucks, it's not only the way it presents itself, it's the way people engage each other in that environment. That's very different than Chevy Chase, Maryland, and Ritz-Carlton. It's very different than the wacko call center at Zappos. I think you should be able to palpably feel the identity in the interactions. Now, somebody may claim an identity other than what is really happening. And I think you can market to that identity. Over time, I think it erodes because there's no sustainment of it. But there are lots of image management, identity management that's going on out there. The true identity of a brand is, I think, in the way Jeff Bezos referred to it, it's what people say about you when you're not around. I'm paraphrasing him. But essentially, identity is the consensual belief about a brand's promise to the marketplace. And I think you get away with a lot if you have invested a lot in that identity. You can have stumbles. Howard Schultz used to talk about making deposits in the reservoir of trust. He was for the most part, founder CEO of Starbucks. We need to make deposits in the reservoir of trust around what we claim our brand is promising. And if we deliver against that most of the time, our stumbles will be quite frequently forgotten as long as we keep making those deposits.
Have you come across organizations that actually systematically destroyed, maybe unintentionally, obviously, their customer experience and culture in this regard?
Yeah, I think I tend not to be the guy to name names. There's images that pop all over my brain. I mean, there's the classic ones like Enron that, people talk about. But what I tend to see with this is that people start focusing more on short-term uh, profitability. They're willing to make cuts that affect value to customers. I was just reading something on Hermes the other day, and talk about a brand that's on the other extreme, right? Like they are so out of touch, it seems, with the efficiency, convenience mantras that are a large part of business. They basically say, things are expensive if you don't get the value for what you pay. They can be pricey if there's a lot of price involved in creating that value, but you walk away saying that was pricey, but it wasn't expensive. And I find that an interesting sort of psychology because it really gets to where do we compromise? I love the founder of the modern day Ritz-Carlton hotel company is a good friend of mine. His name's Horst Schulze, and he would say, Joseph, anybody can come into a hotel and cut costs. Very few people could come into a hotel and create value. He's the first thing you do if you go into a hotel to cut costs is take those flowers out of the entry area. They're just extremely expensive, and God knows they're not necessary, right? Or are they? How much of that is a contributor to the perceived experience of being nurtured? So I think that brands don't intentionally do it, but they kind of boil themselves away from human experiences. Right now, we have that risk with AI. I mean, I think AI, first off, incredible, powerful tool, incredibly important to customer experience. Probably, I think we're predicting in 2025, 80% of all routine transactions are going to be handled by AI in most businesses. We're going to be at 75% of all businesses using AI in the customer service space. That's compared to 2020 when we had about 25% using it. Customers hated it. It couldn't do much. It was wrong more than right. And so I think we're seeing a real transition. The problem is, are there people left around? Can you contact a human if you have a problem? Or is it only going to be chatbot driven? And that's where I think it starts to erode. The world ahead is going to have lots of wonderfulness to self-service. But when I need to opt human, will I have one? Can I contact you through your website, which is really becoming increasingly challenging? So that's where it starts to go. Over time, we convince ourselves we don't need people to serve people.
And I definitely want to touch on that. I want to go back to the piece around the the leader at the Ritz Carlton and your experience with him and other entrepreneurs. Is there something unique in these individuals in regards to how they see the world? Like, what's their thought process and that secret sauce that if you were to reflect upon, you distill into behaviors or traits or attitudes that they would have?
Well, first off, I'm having a meta moment. RJ, I adore your interviewing style. You know the answers to these questions, but you kindly ask them anyway. So I thank you. Yeah, yes. As you know, there is something I think uniquely different about these kinds of leaders and their thought process. I think a lot of us get boxed into believing that we can't do it a certain way, or we get boxed into believing that we have to do it a certain way. And I think most of the leaders that I have are really open minded to what is the problem and what are all the possible solutions. And they don't rule those solutions out as quickly as most of the rest of us do. And I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm kind of being a little mean to myself here. But in general, the people that I see, like a Howard Schultz at Starbucks, he was amazing, like at a different level. That's why I don't run a business on that scale, right? But he could come into a room and he said, guys, we need to have coffee. And it was a group of men. We have to have coffee that's really going to win the afternoon day part, and we're not. We are just not nailing the afternoon. We got the morning. People need that stiff jolt of coffee, but the afternoon they need a kind of lighter roast. I know everything we've got out of the market right now in the light roast space tastes like hay or grain, and we need something real. but it's got to be light. And I need it in 3 years, and I need it. We're going to call it blonde, and people are going to be able to walk into a Starbucks and order a tall blonde, and that's the way it's going to go. And I would say, what? Like, what? And then 3 years later, where people are ordering tall blondes, maybe 2.5 years later, right? I don't, that's a remarkable ability to open up options and to have a real vision of what it could look like and inspire people to want to take that hill with you. Like it's a battle worth fighting.
How much do these leaders that are super successful at this know their space intimately, meaning their product or service? Like, do they have to be an expert? Like that, to me, that story sounds like Howard just knows his shit when it comes to coffee too, right? Like, is that a necessary thing?
I think you have to have a passion for the product that you serve. And with time, that knowledge comes about. You don't have to be a subject matter expert on every element of the business, but I do think there's a great transferability in management and leadership. I think there are specialties that leaders have. You can see turnaround leaders. You can see kind of inspirational leaders. There's all kinds of leaders out there. But I generally think if you don't have passion for the product you serve, it doesn't last for very long. You better get on to the next rodeo because that trick is only going to last so long. People want to know you care about them and about what it is that you're promoting into the marketplace. Look, people can buy anything, anywhere, anytime, anyhow, right? And if you aren't excited about the thing that you're presenting as a solution in the world, why should anybody else on your team be? Selling it just for sale's sake, particularly if later on you come to find out that your leaders knew there was flaws in the product and they pushed it anyway, then it becomes just terrible. So no, I think you do have to have some passion for it. Nothing like that on the level of Howard Schultz and coffee. Though I can tell you, the hotelier that I reference has been a hotelier his whole life and loves the idea of creating wonderful meeting and eating and sleeping places for people.
Yeah, I think it helps looking at your context beyond it just being a widget.
Yeah, though you can help people have a better widget and make it better even if you don't really care too much for it. I mean, I'm not saying you can't lead or improve management, but in the long run, people get much more excited when they know you get it.
How does measurement, Joseph, play into this? Like, how do good companies that execute on customer experience deal with measurement versus like poor ones?
Oh gosh. Well, first off, it's a fuzzy measurement process for customer experience, right? I mean, you're talking about what is the return on experience? And it's a challenge. And I've spent my career trying to navigate this and help people figure out what is that. If you invest X number on me, if you X number on your technology, how does that throughput to what a perception of a customer that then causes what repeat business referrals? What are we looking at? Are we talking increasing ticket because they're more satisfied? If I can take your people who are your promoters, what does that get me versus somebody who maybe is a detractor? And so it is a challenge, but the net promoter score is a helpful metric. So is customer effort score. So is satisfaction transactionally at certain key moments in your journey because it tends to be predictive of other things downstream. So, and it's not just surveying, right? It's also watching customer behavior, how much time they spend in your store, how much time they interact on your virtual world. All of those things suggest greater engagement. Greater engagement leads to greater loyalty and referrals. So there's a bootstrapping strategy that's involved in. Those of us who've done it for a long time have now figured out how to actually identify the things that move the needle and those that don't. But boy, it's been a journey for all of us.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose sales is like your revenue is a great way to measure it. I mean, one can say you can have maybe poor customer experience, but you got cheap pricing, so maybe your sales are good. But generally, if your customer experience sucks, your sales suck too, right? Like there's a correlation.
Well, and I think there is a market for just discount no service. I mean, there's that. So don't waste customer service and customer experience if you want to be commoditized because it's going to run you in the ground. But commoditization is all about lowering the price point all the time, no matter what. You better find some pricing advantages. You better have a great supply chain. You better have low costs in everything, and God bless you. And don't try to be an experience provider. Like I'm good with that. You should have your strategy clear. Is it product strategy just based on price? It's all in the commodity. Is it service? Meaning I really don't want to envelop you with a great experience. I want to get it to you as flawlessly as possible. If there's a breakdown, I want to remedy that as inexpensively as possible. That's a service approach. And I want to have consistency in the execution of it all. But an experiential approach is much more about relational. It's about emotional infusion. It's about owning the narrative, not just owning the product pricing structure. So for me, you got to know your strategy. If you play in my lane, Starbucks, Ritz-Carlton, Zappos, those lanes, you have to be doing something more than executing at the lowest possible price. Those people still have to execute there for efficiency and margins. And they have to be consistent in the service execution and delivery. You have to make it right and get it right. That's still true. But they better add something else to justify that price differential and or stand out from people who aren't doing that third thing.
So let's move into AI. And I think on the back of what you just said, like, does AI then play a different role in a customer experience led organization versus a commodity based one? Like, and how do you get that balance right? Like this is a monster to stare in the face, and like, how do we even deal with this, Joseph?
Oh yeah, well I don't my new book. I'll have a new book out here about it's subtitled "Human Centric and Technology Aided," and it says all business is personal. So really, if you think about it, if the title "All Business is Personal," whether you're using AI or you're using humans, you have to personalize. Now, I think personalization is what AI can do. It can target you with things that are relevant based on your past history and recommendations and the like. Personal is different, right? Like it's slightly different. I have to, by personalizing, it feels more personal to you, but real personal is about, I look at you and say, I can't wait to, continue to talk to you today, or I'm so grateful that we had this time. No AI is going to authentically communicate to you that emotional sense of appreciation, gratitude, excitement. It will make sure that I'm presenting content to you that's relevant to you. So, the key here is figuring out how do you do both? How do you use AI to increase your personalization? And then how do you teach your people to make a personal emotional connection? What we used to call PECs at Zappos.
Let's look into the future here, Joseph, beyond our time on this planet. And, you know, in a scenario where someone walks into a shop and let's just say there's a robot servicing, uh, people, and that robot looks human, feels human, do you think humans would ever or could ever get to a point where they would see a non-human in a personal way? Like, do you think like that could happen?
Oh my gosh, yes, it's happening now. People are having relationships with chat friends, AI driven friends. There are stories that I'm reading of people who their wife goes to bed and they go on and they have their relationship with their chat they're having chat affairs for all practical intents and purposes, right? Their wife doesn't even know they have a chat companion that's AI driven. We are there. So there's no doubt about it. And who says anybody's going to go out anywhere? The idea of going to a restaurant, why would you do that if your AI can create exactly what you want with such diversity and multiplicity in your own home environment? And then you can change your hologram to be able to see lots of different places. I could be having dinner in Bali tonight while still being in my house. I think the limits of what could be and what are becoming are starting to blend in ways that I can't even imagine what's going to happen after I'm gone. I'm having a hard time imagining what's going to happen by the end of 2025 at the acceleration of AI driven technologies.
That's wild. I mean, so we could actually change the very definition of what good customer experience looks like.
Yeah, look, it's the robots right now. I mean, there's a lot of dog robots out there, right? Because in the transition, the goal is for us to accept something that's not completely humanoid. We have that kind of humanoid version. But the dog robot that then stands on its hind legs and washes your dishes, right? Like we have to let go of, okay, it was a dog a minute ago because that's an emotional transition object, but now it's standing, on its back legs washing my dishes. And I'm pretty good with that because I don't really want to have to do that myself or prepare my meal or whatever else is happening. Yeah, we are in prototypes on a lot of this stuff, but it's not that far off.
Yeah, I was watching the old Planet of the Apes with my son the other day. It's one of my favorite series, and he was wigging out on. I was like, "Son, we're actually probably not that far from it, but not with apes, probably with robots."
Well, the Jetsons cartoon series, I mean, it really was not that far off, and it was being designed in the '60s, and so a lot of that was pretty forward thinking, and here we are.
So let's touch on your book, Joseph, and we're obviously going to put all that information in the show notes. What are some of the key features of what you touch on in the book?
Well, so this is my 14th book, and it is about a company that I've worked with. They were called One Medical. When I worked with them, the leaders came from UCLA Health Systems, from Stanford Medical School, medical care system. I was, involved in helping both the UCLA and then this brand or in its early days. What it is the Amazon has purchased them for about $4 billion a couple of years back, but essentially, it was a technology company born out of Silicon Valley. So they got the best designers. They looked at human problems like what's wrong with healthcare in the United States, and particularly in primary care. So it would be as simple as this. When I go to a primary care doctor in the United States, normally I have to sit in the waiting room. And then after I wait for a period of time, then I am escorted down the hall by a nurse and they weigh me in and they measure my height or whatever. And these are things that are not normally relevant to most care, except in the circumstances you're treating obesity, maybe. So I'm doing all these sort of things and then I'm going to wait in the exam room for some period of time. So the whole goal of this was to remove those pain points. So the technology, I'd schedule an appointment. They redesigned the experience from a humanistic perspective so that the provider actually comes and gets me in the waiting room. I'm not escorted down the hall. I don't have to go through all those other pain points that are irrelevant. And I'm not waiting in the exam room either. And quite frankly, their execution is within 3 minutes of your appointment time. 97% of the time, they're going to see you. I mean, you're scheduling the appointments online long before that was, fashionable and in vogue. Almost everything was happening through an app, your communications with your physician, all protected within the regulatory needs of privacy and healthcare. All of that is what's in the book. So if you think about what are the lessons are you really have to figure out what the pain points are, and you have to use technology to pinpoint solutions to those pain points in ways that, that only it can do so that you free up those doctors and other care providers to be able to do the things that you want them to do, which is pay attention to your clinical need instead of all that other, administrative rigmarole.
In that process, Joseph, that sounds like a pretty technical, like almost like a lean kind of mindset. Like, are you diving into those kind of principles when you're auditing?
Huge. There's a lot of
Right.
lean in here. There's Gemba walks are in here. All that stuff is in this book because you need to use elements of it. You don't need to be pure to lean or Six Sigma. You need to extrapolate where the waste is and where the value is and where the solutions could be and where you use technology and where you deploy people. What is the journey? What is the use case? All that stuff is pretty critical. And this book is, I think, a template for how you do that, irrespective of industry.
How do some of these better companies collaborate with their customers in what's that look like?
Well, I think one, obviously just doing good voice of customer listening is a way of collaborating with your customers, particularly if you have inner loops and outer loops. So you're telling your customers what you're doing based on their feedback, and you're actually working inside your organization to get to root causes, to get to innovation. But on the other side of that, you see them invoking councils. So they take some of their high user customers from across their personas and they literally woodshed information with them. It's amazing how much customers say, hey, you're my insider. You're part of my elite customer council. I want to just throw an idea out at you. Now, you may have 100 of these people in each segment, and you're using 10 of them for this particular initiative. You just want to get their view on it because it's been vetted inside your organization 6 ways to Tuesday by people who think they know the customer. But what about just throwing it out to 10 customers and getting a little bit of a read before you go into production? So yeah, you're seeing a lot of the customer council utilizations. Yeah, that's I think a kind of a unique wrinkle.
Yeah, that's almost like a technology development play too, right? You kind of like they do that in tech development. You're bringing the customer into the tent. to really inform what you're building to ensure that you're not building stuff to just build stuff, right?
And on the service perspective, you say, would you rather have more of this or more of that, right? Like it's never a, would you like to have this or that? Because they would say, yes, I'd like to have this and that. So of the two, if you only had one, you do a lot of forced choice opportunities and say, of these two, and you could only have one, which would create the greatest value in your experience?
Well, look, Joseph, I think we'll land the plane there. Fascinating conversation. Where can our audience learn more about you and your work?
Boy, I'm mercilessly everywhere where my name is. So Joseph Michelli will get you me on LinkedIn or TikTok as long as we have it in the United States, and you name it, X, yeah, all those places, LinkedIn, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll have all that information in the show notes. So much. I appreciate so much the time that we've had, and I will be in touch with you soon, man.
Thank you.